All right, despite my power continuously going down on my internet, finally got something done here. And again, this is a huge rabbit hole, the biggest money laundering scandal ever, over 200 billion euros in money laundered through a branch of a Danish bank in Estonia. Let's get into it. Denmark's largest bank decides to expand. In 2007, Danske Bank acquired Finnish Sampo Bank, including its Estonian subsidiary, which later became a branch of Danske Bank. Estonian branch had a large number of non-resident customers, mainly from Russia and former Soviet countries. That's according to the Danish Financial Supervisory Authority. That's my biggest source for establishing the initial stuff. I mean, there were other non-resident, non-Estonian citizens who had accounts and who were part of this and who were laundering money. But anyways, that same year in 2007, the Danish financial, I'm going to call it the DFSA, properly called the FSA, but the Danish FSA. They were warned by Russian central bank regarding possible money laundering risks. And I'm gonna get into this later. Like, did you need to be warned? Anyways, and then in turn, Danske Bank assured the Danish FSA that there is nothing to worry about, and yeah, at that new Estonian branch. And I'm going to say willful blindness. This seems quite obvious. In 2009, the Estonian FSA conducted anti-money laundering inspection of that new Estonian branch of Danske Bank. EFSA reported that the branch had updated its anti-money laundering risk protocols satisfactorily, which it obviously hadn't. Okay, but okay, this is a theme. In 2012, EFSA seemed to change their tune, though, and contacted the Danish FSA to raise concerns about large numbers of non-resident accounts at the branch. And again, FSA followed up with Danske Bank. Danske Bank's head of legal, compliance, and anti-money laundering assured the Danish FSA that the risks were understood and investigated, and don't worry about it. Okay? Now, I could keep going like this, and I must admit, I wish I hadn't, I don't want to say wasted so much time trying to read the Danish FSA's report. And, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it feels a bit like the Chewbacca defense. Is so much, and then we were told this, and then we looked into it, and we told the bank, and then they told us it was okay, and then that same basic thing happened again and again and again, and like, it's obvious that the Danish Financial Supervisory Authority had dropped the ball, and then of course they acknowledged some of the criticisms, but acknowledging doesn't exculpate them, right? So I'm just saying, like, it goes on and on and on. When I say the Chewbacca defense, of course, I'm referring to so much detail and leading to so much confusion that you're kind of obfuscating the point, obfuscating the truth, right? Maybe that's slightly abusing South Park's Chewbacca defense, which Johnny Cochran. Anyways, but either way, like, there seems like some obfuscation and needless detail in this report, so I'm going to move on from that. But really important in the truth finally getting out was this whistleblower, well, the manager of the Estonian branch, British guy Howard Wilkinson. In 2013, he decided to finally report. He could see there was a lot of suspicious stuff going on. The amount of money flowing through that branch, I mean, ultimately it was found that the amount of money flowing through that branch was like 10 times Estonia's GDP. So, like, come on. He reported his findings up the chain in Danske Bank, up to the management over there in Copenhagen, and on that basis, internal audits were conducted, but that's where it ended. The reports weren't published or passed on. There was a cover-up orchestrated, okay? And now I didn't get to go into the details of how that cover-up took place. Basically, they just didn't talk about it, right? So Anyways, as a result of these obvious ethical problems and just problems in general, Wilkinson resigned in 2014. So, a proper investigation finally took place in 2017. Various parties, again, as kind of acknowledged by the Danish FSA's report that I just couldn't get all the way through, various parties had been raising concerns and raising concerns. Finally, in 2017, FSA, for whatever reason, I think there was also pressure because there had been a lot of news stories in the media and whatnot, stuff about Russia. For whatever reason, FSA finally pushed the issue with Danske Bank. And Danske Bank contracted an outside entity to do, legal investigation into these non-resident accounts at that now infamous Estonian branch. And by 2018, that's law firm Brun and Helge. They did their investigations starting in fall of 2017, and by 2018, they published their report called the Report on the Non-Resident Portfolio at Danske Bank's Estonian branch. And investigation included, I think, initially 10,000 non-resident accounts, but then it expanded to include more that they found. And of course, the narrative that they're all Russian, they weren't all Russian. The UL, okay, that's supposed to say the UK, British Virgin Islands. And of course, when I see this, I'm like, wait a minute. Was this any of this stuff mentioned in the good old Panama Papers? This was Panama Papers published just before these findings were. So, no. I mean, I looked up Danske Bank in the Panama Papers and it doesn't show up. Denmark is mentioned all of once. So we maybe need some kind of updated or. Anyways, the findings of that Brain and Helge law firm's investigation was that between 2007 and 2015, money flow through these accounts at the Estonian branch totaled over 200 billion euros. So there you go. I mean, that deserves to be bolded. Like, that's astronomical. The Estonian branch had its own separate IT platform, which made it next to impossible for Danske Bank to implement their own AML procedures and controls and risk assessments and whatnot. So, in a way, the Estonian branch was acting like it was being run like it was just still its own thing. It was previously owned by a Finnish bank, but anyways, it was never truly integrated into the practices, including compliance and AML and all that, of Danske Bank. I'm going to talk a little bit more about why that might have been later, but in 2015, Danske Bank decided to terminate the non-resident portfolio, closing the international banking division by the end of the year. In fact, no, I think the final accounts, non-resident accounts, were closed in 2016. But anyways, consequences at home, or really in Denmark, Denmark, the Baltic, anyways, in Europe, the non-resident portfolio significantly contributed to the profits of that Estonian branch, accounting for up to 99% of profits before credit losses in some years. It's insane, right? Further investigations by other entities were undertaken, and charges against Danske Bank were laid by various authorities, including Danish state prosecutors for serious economic and international crimes, for violating Danish anti-money laundering acts. And Danske Bank CEO Thomas Borgen resigned in fall of 2018. I was supposed to put a citation there to a Reuters story, but it's in my endnotes anyways. And then consequences from the Department of Justice. Many years later, finally, in December 2022, Danske Bank pleaded guilty to conspiring to commit bank fraud and agreed to forfeit $2 billion US to resolve the US Department of Justice's investigation. This penalty addressed the bank's fraudulent activities that misled US financial institutions about its money laundering, its anti-money laundering controls, and the nature of its non-resident customers, particularly those from high-risk regions like the former Soviet Union, Russia. As part of that resolution, Danske Bank committed to implementing significant changes to its compliance program and AML controls. This included the appointment of an independent expert to ensure adherence to enhanced regulatory standards. Yada yada. This starts to sound a little bit familiar to some of the things I talked about with the SNC level, and don't do it again. I feel like this is probably more meaningful, though. Well, I kind of rushed through that. So, see, here's the thing. I really meant to spend more time researching the consequences because there's got to be so much more. Like, I know that obviously the value of Danske Bank's stock plummeted. I think shareholders lost something to the tune of is this true? $900 billion? That can't be right because that's the same. No, is it? Anyways, billions of dollars in share value definitely lost. And again, Danske Bank, have I mentioned this? Danske Bank is Denmark's largest bank. It's one of the biggest banks in the Nordic area. But, some closing thoughts that I can't help but make. A lot of people, I'll make this video public, even though not my best work. I feel like I have more questions than answers. Like, what else happened to Danske Bank here? So, if anybody wants to tell me in the comments below this video, please do. But anybody who knows me knows that I lived in the former Soviet Union. Over here, where is it? Oh, they didn't even get it on this map. I could never find a map to include both the Nordic countries and Georgia, where I used to live. Anyways, but having lived in Georgia and seeing how deeply the old stock Soviet kleptocrats are still entrenched there and trying to get rid of them, there still hasn't been full success in doing that. When I was there, that was part of Mila Saakashvili's um, campaign to get rid of the old guard, crooked, pro-Soviet, pro-Putins that infest every aspect of the financial system and the civil service in Georgia. And that's true of all, I'm sure. That is true of all, if well, maybe most, especially these smaller, anyways, former Soviet states like Estonia, clearly. Um, so, I mean, when you just look at how the depth and breadth of this scandal, you can't tell me that there weren't all kinds of people in Estonia in the know and that were absolutely willfully, intentionally using that little bank to funnel funds from their kleptocrat Putin's buddies through there. Like this seems like totally non-controversial to say to me. Um, and of course, I meant to, include some more references and things about that. Money was traced back to Putin's family and cronies and stuff. All that being said, I'm sure there were other entities passing money through this little Estonian bank. There had to be. Um, so those are some geopolitical historical realities that I wanted to mention were ignored or understood, and they pretended like they didn't know. Like the people at Danske Bank, at headquarters in Copenhagen, they come on. They must have known some of this about the problem of dirty Russian influence and dirty Russian money in these former Soviet states, especially the little ones, like the ones in the Baltics. I should probably mention that this expansion by Danske Bank included some other Baltic banks, but this Estonian one was obviously the worst for dirty money. I don't know for a fact if there was dirty money going through. I assume there must have been a Latvian and a Lithuanian. But anyways, I'm not going to keep speculating. I wanted to do more research. My internet kept on going down. So, and I wanted to mention that the Estonian language is a pretty unique thing. Estonian culture, yada, yada, yada. What does that have to do with anything, James? Earlier, I mentioned, and this has definitely been verified. This is in that our Danish financial sort of FSA report that the Estonian bank had its own IT thing up and running, and it was never properly integrated with the Danish system. So AML controls and whatnot couldn't be put into place because the Estonian. And I'm going to tell you, I'm pretty sure part of that, why that was allowed to happen, it would have been too costly and difficult, too costly, according to some cost benefit analysis conducted by somebody at Danske Bank, to bother to get the kinds of translation specialists you would need because it's such an obscure, you know, it's such an obscure language. There just aren't that many people with the specific skill set required to do that sort of IT work. And also in relation to AML specialization and internal controls that speak Estonian and Danish. I'm sure that's extremely rare, and that if not a real excuse, a real reason could have been used as an excuse to not update the system at the Estonian bank, and therefore what we don't know doesn't hurt us because hey, I don't know what them Estonians is talking about, you know. That was not a Danish accent. Anyways, and I just wanted to mention, you know, the concept of snow washing, laundering money through Canada because Canada's got this profile of being so clean as driven snow and all this stuff. And of course, I've you know briefly, well, not lived, but I stayed in Denmark for a while, and I got the impression that it's even more high functioning, even more well put together, even more controlled and constructivist. You get that impression, and when you find out about this, it's like, and you can say, well, James, this happened technically in Estonia, not in Denmark. Yeah, this was a Danish problem. Okay, it's a shock to me. So maybe we should expand the concept of snow washing to include the Nordic states too. Maybe we need to start taking a closer look at some Norwegian banks, maybe, and some Swedish ones too. Anyways, and of course, as soon as I knew I was going to be doing anything to do with Denmark, I wanted to read some Jyllandsposten articles. I didn't get too far with that because it's behind a paywall. Now, Jyllandsposten is Denmark's biggest newspaper, I believe. Anyways, certainly most infamous and notorious. There was something with some cartoons back in the day. Anyways, but it's a it's a great newspaper actually, and this former chief of police, Johan Bridge, writes about, do we really have adequate things in place to deal with and to punish fraudsters of this magnitude? And he's quite pessimistic or cynical about it. But in reading it, I feel like they're probably better than we are here in Canada. So, you know, that's the thing about the Danes. They ain't afraid to do it melancholy. So I wish I could have went further with this. I mean, you know, ended up raising more questions than answers, and I really wish I could have went deeper into what the bigger consequences were for Danske Bank, but it's certainly still around and kicking and, you know, fine. I meant to take more of the pictures for this presentation from their image bank on their website, but I only ended up grabbing the one. By the way, this whistleblower got an award for whistleblowing, anyways. And there was another thing with Russian politics. A sort of whistleblower on that end got assassinated, probably for calling out Putin's buddy's dirty money getting funneled through the Estonian branch there. And I guess I'm going to have to leave it there. So, again, my apologies for not being better, but I barely had power and internet, and it's deadlines are piling up. So I thank you for your time. Cheers.